And this is going to show you across your entire portfolio some important metrics. You can see what is scheduled for today, if you've got tenants that are late, what your occupancy is, and then each one of you can have your own version of this screen. So you can be very specific as far as which box scores and graphs you'd like to have displayed. And then all of the scores and graphs also give you the ability to drill into a score or a graph to see detail. So for example, here I've got 7 vacant units. I can click on that portion of my graph to see the units listed individually. Or like for late tenants, I can select the box score to be taken directly to a rent roll navigator to where it's easy for me to email them all a late notice, for example. So you can see from this menu, I've got a variety of actions I can perform, like posting transactions, generating a letter, sending an email. So a lot you can do from this screen. And you've also got the ability to utilize a feature we call property lists. So if you all get to the point where now you've acquired another property, then you can define property lists specific to those properties. And then if you'd like to have only data showing from one of those properties or from properties that are part of a certain accounting entity that you've created, you can use this property list feature to say, okay, only show me the following properties. When I turn on my list, then you'll see this Property Boss Today screen change. Now when you're recording payments, when you're viewing work orders, you've got the ability to only see data from the properties that are on that list. And you'll have that property list bullet point display in red. I can also then remove the property list to see information across my entire portfolio. Property Boss will also prepare transactions that are ready for your approval in the Property Boss Today Navigator in this Auto Post Activity section here. So this is where you'll see on the first of the month, for example, the rent due charges that are ready to be posted. If you are charging other transactions such as common area maintenance, utilities, Property Boss will prepare those transactions as well. You'll be able to see them listed individually, and then you can approve them by selecting the execute option. But by being able to view the detail of the transactions before they then post to all the different registers in Property Boss, you've got the ability to not post a transaction that is incorrect. Because one thing you don't want to do is then spend a lot of time having to hunt that transaction across various registers if your numbers aren't adding up correctly. You can go to your lease, make the change to where that transaction and then also all future transactions are going to be posted correctly, and then only posted the one time when it is correct. All right. So
let me just stop you right there. And so the rental revenue, CAM and all of that, you know, it sounds to me like it's still a batch processing. But like you said, if before we go ahead and post it and we get to preview definitely and to check for any errors, and we can then individually go into individual tenants and correct anything that doesn't look right before we post. So that's what you were trying to tell us.
That is exactly correct. Yeah. I tell you what, let me go into a database that hopefully has some transactions that are ready to be posted so I can show you that screen, give you a better idea of what your options are. Because in addition to being able to view transactions, you've got the ability to like skip transactions if necessary. You can get into the register for an account to see the history on an account, for example. I don't have any transactions there, so let me do a quick modification here. Let me prepare some transactions for you to see and post. All right, so this is what you'd see like on the first of the month. We've got rent due transactions. The exclamation mark alerts you to the fact you've got some activity that's waiting for you to approve. So now I can double click to see those transactions listed individually, and I can skip individually or by group if I need to get to the register. So you've got these options from the screen, but what you'll typically do is just use the execute option to go ahead and post these transactions. And these will be categorized as well. So you'll see in your case rent due, CAM charges, So the other transactions you've got will be grouped by type. Okay?
So how are the tenants' accounts being shown here? The primary names being the contact person, and
well, yeah. So the database that I use to prepare these transactions is one that's set up for residential management. So I'm sorry.
So each one of those are just units, so it would be comparable to a tenant.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what you're seeing as the primary tenant on the lease.
So how are the different kinds of charges being broken out here, or do I need to click into the account to drill down? How do I go about going into each individual account to drill down the various charges and make corrections as needed? So right now what I'm seeing, $990, that's just a lump sum.
So what you're seeing here, these are all individual rent due transactions. So
this is one type of charge.
That's right, yeah, and there are no other transactions that are ready to be posted through this auto post routine. So if there were, sorry?
Yes, so if there were other ones, they would be shown on separate tabs or just as different categories.
They would also be listed in separate categories. So for example, for CAM charges, you would see a separate section here listed CAM charges, and then you would also see individual transactions listed in that category.
So with this view, would we be able to sort it by tenant instead and have each individual tenant shown as a line and the different charges right below it? So I think that would be easier.
No, we don't have an option for you to have it listed by tenant. You can sort within the category, or you can sort on a screen similar to Excel by clicking on any of these columns. Well, we don't give you the option to see, okay, this tenant has rent due, CAM charge, utility charge, and then show the next tenant. It's all going to be grouped according to the transaction category. But
delinquency report.
yeah, I mean, now there's lots of reports that you can run to where if you wanted to have that data organized by tenant, then that's very easy to do. And I wouldn't focus too much time on this because this is just part of the auto post routine of processing transactions. I don't believe you're going to use this from a reporting perspective at all. This just gives you the ability to do a quick review of the transactions that are coming due to post. And what most people do is just they'll select execute. Once you've posted these transactions 3-4 months in a row, there's really not much need for you to go in and do further analysis.
But see, I would imagine as contract terms lapse or contract terms change with escalating clauses for both CAM charges and minimum rent and such that you know at some point we will want to review it on a monthly basis to see if there are changes to any charges, whether they are reflected accurately.
Sure, yeah. And we have reports specific to that. So let me show you a report that will give you the data in the format that you're suggesting. So I'm going to go on the left-hand side to this viewing reports option. Excuse me. And here we've got over 100 reports which are sorted by category, and you can also sort by the title of the report. So if I start typing in change, for example, and here we've got our lease rent changes history report. And so this is going to show you for each tenant a series of escalations, for example, all the changes to the rent specific to that lease.
But for the purpose of just right before posting, like you were saying, we wanted to take a quick look, or we wanted to, well, actually, I would say we don't want to take a quick look. We want to take a pretty thorough review of all the posting before we actually post. Because once we post to go ahead and adjust anything, that would mean how would we go about doing that? Once we post, either do we have to reverse the batch posting? And
Go ahead, sorry.
So I would think that we would want to check every single tenant and their respective charges before we post. And I just think right now the easier way might be to look at each tenant and the different charges associated with that tenant.
Okay.
Because that's how we would probably have it on file.
All right, so here's what I would suggest for that. You do have the ability from this auto post routine to, actually I say that and I'm mistaken.
I don't know if this helps, but this might not be typical of other commercial property management. I mean, I actually don't have that much experience with commercial property management. I'm a university accountant. So anyways, but I can tell you what I understand to be what we're doing things differently with this property is that because we are in transition period, each tenant are subject to quite different terms. And you know, we have all tenants in general are most definitely subject to minimum rent, with the exception of a few that are only subject to percentage rent. And only a handful of them pay CAM charges, only a handful of them pay direct utility reimbursement, and only a handful of them pay association marketing fees and such. So I would think for the way we're operating right now, we will probably need to see the different charges per tenant, and that, you know, that's something that I think, you know, if you can find us a report other than that change report, because that change report gives us an overview of how over time that tenant has changes to their charges. But for the particular month, let's say we're sitting here just trying to post April, I mean, we would just need to see, okay, well, of the 30-some tenants that we have, 10 of them has only minimum rent, 5 of them pay us. So with each specific tenant, we just want to kind of go down the list and see that, you know, the charge is correct.
Okay, so there's a couple different ways that you can analyze the transactions that have posted, and also export that information into Excel to further manipulate the data. So once you post the transactions, you'll see this log that shows you exactly what has transpired. This can be exported to Excel. We've also got a transaction search navigator where you can define reports, and this might be the tool you use more often, in order to drill into specific areas to show only transactions within a certain date range, to only show transactions that are assigned to a certain account, in order to review the transactions to make sure that they are correct. So we've got navigators throughout Property Boss where we've got a variety of default reports that are available, and then you can also design your own reports using this modify report option. This gives you the ability to add and remove columns. You can design your own columns through custom fields. You can insert group breaks. You can sort ascending or descending based on any of the columns that you've added to the report. You can also insert filters. And some options for these filters include your ability to have it prompt you for values, such as show me transactions within the following date range, or also date calculations. So you can design a report that shows you transactions that exist from today to the past 30 days. So you might want to design reports in this transaction search area that show you per tenant exactly what transactions were posted, and then any of these reports can be exported to Excel for further manipulation if necessary.
So these are post-posting, though?
That is correct. For you to modify a transaction, it's very simple. You can just go to the register and either, if you've got the appropriate security privileges, modify the amount. You can do a reversal. You can assign the transaction to a different account if it was posted incorrectly. So.
Oh, so it is very easy to adjust the amount being posted afterwards, after batch posting.
It is, yeah. So if I need to make an adjustment, I can just go to the register for the account that I need to make the adjustment on, and then double-click on the transaction. You'll see here we've got the transaction is locked, so you'll see that if this is something that has been sent into QuickBooks, for example. So we're going to make you unlock the deposit that it's on, so that you don't get out of balance between Property Boss and QuickBooks. If this had not been sent into QuickBooks, then I can just go in and modify the amount of the transaction. So let me give you an example here. So let's say we need to charge a manual late fee. So if I find that the amount of his late fee was incorrect, it's easy as double-clicking and overriding that transaction. Okay?
So what kind of audit trail does it leave? So before it gets sent to QuickBooks, any changes you make on Property Boss, it's relatively easy, but once you send it over to QuickBooks, then the change needs to be made on the QuickBooks side.
Well, that's something that you kind of look at it on a case-by-case basis. There are some scenarios to where it might be less time-consuming for you to go in and make a one-time adjustment to QuickBooks, but that's the kind of thing that can lead to you getting out of balance if it's not done correctly. So there's not really a set-in-stone rule as far as, okay, if you have to make an adjustment, do you do it in Property Boss and then resend the information, or do you just make an adjustment to QuickBooks? I don't have a rule that applies to every scenario in answer to that question. Okay?
No, I understand that. I guess I'm more looking at the fact that, you know, if we were to post something, post the charges as a batch, and they don't find any kind of adjustments necessary, and we go ahead and do that. And it looks to me like there's not a clear trail to track those adjustments. But actually, that's a good and bad thing, you know, because the ease of making an adjustment is there, which is a good thing. But you know, being that we do have multiple users, and right now I guess we're still trying to implement this, and haven't really gotten on the internal control process in place, and you know, obviously not really knowing the system, what kinds of built-in controls it has. We need to start just taking those things into consideration.
Okay. We do have an audit trail, so you can see what adjustments have been made to the transaction by user ID, date, and time. And you can also are able to, per user, be very specific as far as what the security privileges are. So it's really up to the administrator as how rigidly you want to enforce the ability to make adjustments, and you can track what adjustments have been made.
Oh, so regardless of what the setup is, the history, the track changes history are there, as shown on the screen right now.
Yeah, we do have an audit.
That's great. That's actually great. Where is that?
It can show you on any transaction any changes that have been made. And
Where's that?
Sorry?
Where's the icon for the transaction to change the history? Where do you find that?
So on the transaction, you'll go from Actions to View Transaction History, and then this window will present several tabs where you can see, okay, this is when it was initially posted. The change log will show the changes that have been made to the transaction. And then one thing that's kind of unique about Property Boss is you've also got the ability to see from a journal entry perspective, you can flip from cash to accrual. Which is kind of nice.
It's one of those things, again, I don't know if we want to keep flipping between cash and accrual, because I think it's an accounting general rule that you want to just stick to one, not flipping from one to the other.
Okay.
I think in general, in the accounting world, we don't want to keep flipping back and forth between cash and accrual basis. I mean, to maintain the set of flows for any kind of transactions, we want to just stick to one or the other. And we're on accrual.
But you'll be able to, for each accounting file that you use, specify whether you want to use cash or accrual. And also keep in mind, you'll be using the QuickBooks interface, and so when you're looking at things like journal entries, and that is going to occur in QuickBooks.
I guess I just don't really understand what that function would be for. Let's say we enter a journal entry just to record, let's say, accrued payroll expense or something. You know, how would clicking that cash button affect anything?
It would not. And that is in relation to our internal general ledger, which if you're using the QuickBooks interface would not be in use. So I don't think it would apply to your scenario.
Okay.
So
why don't you show us a little?
Sorry, go ahead.
Why don't you show us a little bit on how to set up a tenant abstract, just how to enter in contract terms and.
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to, but I think based on where this conversation led to, it might be a good idea for us to talk about in general what Property Boss is going to be kind of in charge of and how Property Boss and QuickBooks are going to work together, give you a general sense of how that works, and then we can talk about, okay, so now that we know what Property Boss will kind of quote-unquote be in charge of, then we can talk about the specific functions of Property Boss. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that sounds good. That sounds good.
Okay. All right, so let me flip into a database that's got the QuickBooks interface enabled. So with Property Boss and QuickBooks, think about Property Boss as being the front end for your data. So this is where you're going to be able to easily track any the payments you receive from tenants, the expenses that need to be posted for tenants, expenses against the property as well. Excuse me. You're also able to track things like phone calls, work orders, generate documents like leases, late notices, because this is a property management specific system. And then you're also able to have Property Boss then send the financial data over into QuickBooks that you need. So if I go to the General Ledger section, each accounting file that you have in the database, you'll be able to select whether or not it's going to use our General Ledger, our QuickBooks Detail option, or our QuickBooks Simple option. The QuickBooks Detail option does allow you to send over information by class. So if you need to track your income and expenses by unit in QuickBooks, then we do support sending over data in that method. You'll map a path to your QuickBooks company file, and then we can bring over from QuickBooks your chart of accounts and your vendors. Once we have the chart of accounts from your QuickBooks file, then we will do transaction mapping with you to where we will now assign Property Boss transactions to the appropriate accounts from your QuickBooks company file. And you'll see each transaction, you're going to have instructions on how to map that correctly as part of this process. Once you've mapped the Property Boss transactions to the appropriate accounts, then we have an interface run process that will take the data you've entered in Property Boss. It will show you how it appears in Property Boss. It will also show you how it will appear in QuickBooks prior to the interface running so that you don't have any surprises showing up in QuickBooks. So when I select the Pending Interface Run tab, I can first tell Property Boss if I want to remove certain sets of data, such as if I only want to send over bills to pay, for example, I can remove the other types of data. The next step of this process is going to be, here are all of the transactions that are in Property Boss that are ready to be sent into QuickBooks. From this window, I can see the account that will be debited, the account that will be credited. I can see if it's going to be sent over using a class structure. If I need to drill into a transaction, I can just double-click to see detail. I can also limit this window to showing now transactions only from a certain bank deposit or of a certain type. I can also remove rows from being sent into. And if you're, say that you're going to go live as of July 1st, and there's some information that's in QuickBooks that you've already posted, and you don't need Property Boss to send that information to QuickBooks, but you do want to post that information on Property Boss so that you've got that data available to you on reports, then you can easily take that, say, historical information from April, for example, and just mark that as already sent so you don't duplicate your data in Property Boss, in QuickBooks, I'm sorry. All right, now the last step of the interface run, it will show you, okay, these are the entries that will be made in QuickBooks. So at this point, if this all looks correct, then I can have the interface run by selecting Send, but nothing has taken place until I select the Send option. So the interface does not occur automatically, and you've got a very high level of control over what information is sent into QuickBooks as part of this interface run process. You can run it as many times as you like. If you have Property Boss residing on the same server as QuickBooks, then QuickBooks does not even have to be open for the interface run to occur. The next time that you go into your QuickBooks file, you have to see the entries that have been made by Property Boss. And each entry is going to have this interface file number on it as a memo so that I can track back to previous interface runs. And we've got a variety of reports to where if you need to analyze the data that's in Property Boss, where you are able to see what was set for a certain date range, for example. All right, does that make sense?
Can I get a clarification on what you were just saying about if Property Boss was on the same server as QuickBooks? Isn't Property Boss an SAS?
You can do it either way. We have a web-based option, and we also have a software purchase option. So if you want to have us host the application for you, that's fine. You can also buy and own Property Boss and host it yourself.
Oh, I see. I see.
Okay?
Yep. Clear.
All right, great. All right, so any questions on how Property Boss and QuickBooks will interface?
So it's more of a one-way interfacing, right? So, well, I like to think of it as Property Boss is going to be the subledger maintenance, and the subledger basically then updates the general ledger, which is going through to the QuickBooks. And I mean, there's very little other than initial setup where, for example, like you talked about chart of accounts importing from QuickBooks. So that, in that sense, it's a two-way, but more, I guess, more on a regular basis is mostly Property Boss updating QuickBooks as in a subledger to general ledger interface.
That is correct. Yeah, so once Property Boss is in use, then you're going to find that your use of QuickBooks from a property management perspective, it drops way off, like to the point of almost never being in use. I mean, once you've got Property Boss in place, you don't need to even have really tenants set up in QuickBooks at all because all that will be set up in Property Boss. So now you'll use QuickBooks to produce like a financial statement to see what's happening with the property, where now there's other aspects that might come into play, things like depreciation, capital investments, things that QuickBooks does an excellent job of managing, or to cut checks to your vendors, which those payables will be sent directly into QuickBooks by Property Boss. You've also got the ability, if you want to just enter those payables directly into QuickBooks and not have them appear in Property Boss, that's fine too. But once you've got Property Boss in place, you're going to be in that, 95% of the time in order to see what a tenant's balance is, what available units you have, to schedule your rent escalations. All of that's going to be in Property Boss and not in QuickBooks at all. So, for example, go ahead. Sorry.
As far as payables is concerned, the only time or when we try to evaluate whether to focus more on having those in QuickBooks or versus Property Boss would be whether those expenses are allocated out to individual tenants, right? Because if they're even though if they're CAM charges or recoverable expense type, we if they're not being directly allocated out to individual tenants, then there really is no reason, or it almost wouldn't matter either way whether we have it in Property Boss or have it in QuickBooks.
You're exactly correct. Yeah, it's entirely up to you. If it's not tied to a tenant and you want to put that directly in QuickBooks and just skip Property Boss altogether, that is not an issue.
But Property Boss does have the capability to do the CAM.
Yeah. So it's fine if you want. I mean, some people, that's their preference. Is you might as well enter that in Property Boss and just have it sent into QuickBooks. That way you have it both places. But other people, based on how their organization is set up, if they just do the payables out of a location that only works out of QuickBooks, that is not an issue either.
I see. Yep. So it's also a matter of access and function separation and that type of thing, right?
Exactly. Yes, ma'am.
Yep.
Okay. All right, so now let's talk about how we would create a new tenant. We do have the ability on the prospect side, if you all are tracking your efforts in communication with prospective tenants, to where now you've got a record for your prospects where you can go through an application process. We can design an online application that can integrate into your website where somebody can now submit an application that would create the prospect. Then you can do things like pull credit. You're able to assign activity, which would show in Property Boss today for the various members of your team. You can charge an application fee, which at this point is assigned to the prospect. You don't have to assign that to a lease or to a unit. You can hold units as of a certain date, and then if you try to move somebody else in, you get a reminder. You can set up a custom application process or interview process. And then if they sign a lease, then you can just convert the prospect into a tenant. Are you all tracking your prospecting efforts? Or are you all pretty much full occupancy?
No, we're not, but I think that the prospect tracking is being done somewhat off the system currently. And, you know, like I said, because of what we plan to do there, which is, you know, 50% property is going to be the loft, and the other 50%, even the other 50% will be partially commercial, partially still occupied by the university. So in that sense, university is going to be more than 50% of the tenants. So we're really not looking at we don't really need a very robust system that handles thousands of tenants, and you know, we just wanted something that's going to be sufficient for the fundamental functions of, you know, any commercial property management, and that's we're not in the business. We're really not in the business of commercial property. So I mean, we basically just need something that we could use. You know, it's relatively user friendly and something that you know, would serve the purpose. So that's about it.
Okay.
We're not looking to spend a ton of money to have something sophisticated, because we're really not in this business, which is very ironic.
All right. So you probably would not be interested in that prospect module then. So let's talk about how you would move somebody in to one of your units and how you would set up the defaults on the unit to make that move and process more efficient. So here in the Units and Leases Navigator, this is where you can see information in a variety of levels at once. So for your property to have multiple units, like a commercial property, then you'll see as you open the property up, different levels, and then as I make a selection, you'll see options on the right change. You can organize the screen however you...
Can I stop for a second?
Sure.
Even though we might not be, well, down the road we'll decide that for ourselves, but let's just say, is it true that if we were to utilize that prospect tracking, and so all the information that's entered in during that preliminary stage, and if we finally do get the tenant in, so it's the advantage that all that information will be then imported into the tenant information, and then we just go from there and enter in the rest of it, which is mostly going to be contract terms and such.
Well, there's a number of advantages. Certainly, as you mentioned, having a prospect convert to a tenant removes your, then you don't have to enter the information again. But it also gives you some interesting reporting options. So you're able to design reports such as, okay, so the following lead source gave us 10 prospects, and we were able to convert 2 of those into tenants. You're able to assign activity to different users of the system that are specific to prospects, where when somebody in Property Boss today logs in, they can see I've got 2 items for the following prospects that's scheduled for today. You're able to pull credit on prospects and have the report arrive within Property Boss. Mm-hmm. So there's a number of advantages to the prospect module. We can give you the ability to evaluate the prospect module on a trial basis for up to, I believe it's 7 prospects. So you can kind of try it before you buy it.
Module standard or customized?
I'm sorry?
Are those modules standard or customized?
You can do a lot of customization to the prospect module. To give you an example, all of the activities you see here on the right-hand side, you can define every activity that is available here and then have those activities trigger status changes. So, for example, when we've got an application that's taken, you can have that status change from prospect to applicant. So there's a lot.
What I was trying to ask was more, so this prospect tracking module, is that optional, or is that considered an add-on, or is that considered standard to the system?
It is an optional module that is an additional cost, so it is not part of the core functionality.
Okay, yeah, okay. So as we go over all of these, can you make sure that you go over which ones are optional and which ones are standard, so we know what our options are.
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to. So, so far, everything, look, go ahead.
Yes, let's move on to the tenant setup process.
Okay. So far, everything we've looked at has been part of our core functionality aside from that prospect module. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right, so if we're going to, now in the Units and Leases Navigator, I mentioned earlier, you can organize this Navigator in different ways. So if it makes more sense for you to have this listed by the tenant's name, then it's easy for you to set that up. And then to access a tenant's record, I can just start typing in a name. So for example, if I need to go to John Taylor here, if I just type a T, then I get directly to, now here's, you can see the property in the unit. So based on each user's preference, you can have this organized in different ways. You can set up custom fields, and then you can have that saved as your default. I want to return to the property view here. So I'm going to go into one unit of this building by selecting Edit this unit, and then here's where we can set up the default terms for the unit. So here, let's say that your market rent is $1,000, and I'm going to set up a schedule of rental escalations on the unit. So we'll say that every year the rent's going to go up $500. And so what can happen here is that now when you create the lease, then these escalations will be automatically added to the lease that's created, but you can then go in and override if necessary. All right, so set our market rent. You can set the type of late fee that you charge. As you can see, we can handle pretty much any type of late fee calculation method that you all come up with. We'll just give them a kind of
any changes to the tenant setup, or it's a pretty standard feature throughout this system that any changes made will be reflected in the history, transaction history, under Actions menu. So if we were to go in and change any contract term, the changes will be reflected in the history.
That is correct.
Okay.
So also any, you saw I can set up the default deposit that's required on the unit, and then also you can set up any other repeating transactions that are required. So let's say in this case they pay for cleaning. Let's say there's some sort of a, let's see, garage rent, let's say. So you can have other transactions prepared for you automatically as well. So now, when I create a lease for the unit, then I can have these default terms carried over onto the lease. So we'll give it a start date of today. We'll make this a 1-year lease. Now, at this point, I can override those default settings if necessary. And if I need to go in and look at the schedule of rental charges, it's going to prompt me to charge that deposit, which I can select to not charge it or charge a different amount. Then I can see on the lease what transactions have been set up to post. Then I can also see what the schedule of escalations are, and I can go in and create new escalations in this rent changes window. All right, so now we'll create the tenant for the unit. As you can see, we can have this either be an individual or a company. So in your case, if this is a commercial tenant, then we can have the company listed and also contact other companies. You can have an unlimited number of contact types in the system, and that allows you, when you generate documents on a property law, something like a late notice, for example, then you can have, if you need to have this document sent to the tenant, if they've got a corporate office where you need to have a separate document that's created with a separate mailing address and information, then that's easy to do. And so now when I go to the register, you can see I've got 3 transactions that are now ready to post. And what Property Boss is going to do is it will allow you to run auto post on just this lease. So now I can see all the transactions that are ready to be posted. When I select execute, it's going to prorate these transactions based on the move-in date of the lease, or the start date of the lease, I should say, it's going to show you exactly the amounts that we came up with for the prorated amounts. And we can override these very easily if you have said, all right, well, for the first month we're going to charge full rent, and then the second month we're going to charge that prorated amount. It's very easy for you to double-click the transaction and change that to the full $1,000. Okay?
Yeah.
Any questions on that? All right.
Well, I think up until this point we've it's a lot, and it's getting down to the real detail level, which is nice, which is I think what we need to see. So why don't we back up a second and I guess like right now I think we want to see a more of a overview again of all the various functions down to, well, as we previously already talked about, Property Boss can handle invoices, expense tracking, and all of that. So we may want to go over some of that later on. But for now, why don't we get an overview of all the basic functions that Property Boss is capable of, and what are some of the highlighted features, I guess.
Okay.
And I guess some of the integration between Property Boss and QuickBooks that we need to be aware of, that it's either unique to Property Boss or that it's some of the better, I guess, features.
Okay. So in general, we talked about Property Boss today. It's going to show you now what's happening across all your properties. And then you've got the ability to set up your units and leases to where those transactions are going to be prepared for you by Property Boss. And now as you receive payments, then you can easily and efficiently record these payments in Property Boss. So you can have now a list of tenants presented to you where you can sort these ascending or descending based on these different columns. I can sort by the tenant's name or by the unit, for example. So if you've got a stack of checks on your desk, you can just go in and select, okay, I've got the following payments. I can generate receipts by checking this box. If I record payments now, it's going to post all these transactions, which can then be placed onto a deposit. And Property Boss can give you a deposit slip to take with you to the bank, and this is formatted to match the QuickBooks stationery for a bank deposit. So that makes dealing with the payments, your standard payments from tenants, very easy. We also have the ability to work with web services. So you can have your tenants log in order to see information on their account, see information like a copy of the lease, to submit payment information. That will arrive in Property Boss for processing, to where you'll be able to see whether that was processed successfully, or whether it's a chargeback, and that's going to arrive as a transaction on a register. So you don't get a statement where you've now got to figure out which transaction should be posted from the statement that has just account information, for example. They're also able to submit maintenance requests from that web service, which would then create a work order in Property Boss. By default, Property Boss has 3 work order groups defined, where you can track phone calls, also inspections and work orders, and you're able to link items between groups. So on an inspection, anything that you find, you can easily create work orders for those items, which can then be assigned to different members of your staff or assigned to external vendors. Also, as you track a phone call, if the result of that conversation is that a work order needs to be created, you can create a related work order from the phone call. Once you've got this data in Property Boss, then you've got all these navigators to where you can now drill into this data to see, well, what work orders are assigned to me? How many work orders have been assigned to a vendor in the past 90 days? You can see per vendor a history of all the transactions having to do with that vendor. You can see what the time to completion is based on who the work orders have been assigned to. You can see, okay, we've had more work orders related to a certain type of work than any other category over the past 6 months. These navigators where you can design custom reports are in addition to our report library that's got over 100 reports that are specific to property management. So this allows you to easily generate invoices to where if you need to prepare these in advance of the first, where it's going to list line by line what the tenants owe, then you can easily email those out of Property Boss to the tenants. If you need to present a list of the available units to a prospect where it's going to show what it rents for, the amenities, and you can customize this report, you can easily do so. If you need a list of what leases are coming due to expire, if you need something like a lease abstract, then we've got all these different reports, and Property Boss can easily be generated based on the day range that you select. Lease abstract is a bad example. Let me show you the expiration list report. So this can be generated on whatever date range you select, and then also against certain units or against certain properties. You've also got the ability to, once you've found that there are maybe 5, 10 reports that are the most useful out of this whole group, you can define your own report batch. You can modify the criteria for these reports. So I can have it set to use a certain date range, for example, or if I need to generate invoices on different dates, I can have multiple instances of the same invoice in my report group, and then I can have different criteria set for the different invoices. And now I can just go in and run my entire batch of reports. It remembers that criteria for you. We've also got the ability to store media in Property Boss. So if you've got something like a signed lease, you got a picture of damages, an invoice from a tenant, you'll see throughout Property Boss a media option. So this is where you can now store files, and if you're using our web services, you can take something like a copy of the lease and make that available through the resident portal. You can also take something like an invoice, maintenance that was done, and have that. Let me go into a database that's got some media in it real quick. You can have that available in Property Boss. So for example, when I visit this work order group, I can see pictures of the work that's been done or the damages that need to be fixed. If I go into a property, I can see a picture of the property. You can store Word files, Excel files, PDF files, so that you've got it all available electronically from Property Boss. And then once it's in Property Boss, you can select whether or not you want to publish this on the website for residents, for example, or have this information, if it's a picture of the property or the unit, then you can have that show on a report that Property Boss can generate for you that lists your available units. So in general, Property Boss is just going to bring an entirely new tool set to your property management that QuickBooks was never designed to do. But you don't have to sacrifice any of the accounting functionality that you're used to by having Property Boss prepare financial data for QuickBooks, so that you can still use it to now reconcile your checking account, pay bills, everything that you're used to using QuickBooks for.
I think I'm starting to see that, Property Boss does have, a lot of, it's probably, it's a property management tool that has certain functionality that will, I guess, either enhance or crosses over to the accounting system, which is exactly what we want. Now, I don't know how much during this transition that we are trying to take over the accounting function from the property management company, but we are keeping the property management company for the day-to-day property management side of it, which means everything from negotiation with tenants to negotiating with prospective tenants and maintenance functions, like those work orders and inspections and all of that, and then things like to not so much the building part, but the communications with tenants, that sort of thing. So, I mean, it looks to me like Property Boss does cover almost every aspect of property management itself, and so what will be, we probably won't be utilizing everything that it's capable of, but it does look like that crossover part to QuickBooks will serve our purpose of just basically it functions as a subledger detail management. And
okay.
I think more importantly, mostly on the side of rental charges management, CAM charges, that sort of thing. So why don't we focus a little bit more on that, on those functionalities that crosses over to the accounting system.
Okay. I'm not sure what else to show you that we didn't already cover as far as how the information gets sent into QuickBooks. Tell me more specifically about what you want.
What about CAM charges, CAM recon, CAM reconciliation and such? How does the system?
All right. So we do have a process to where you're able to take CAM charges and then have Property Boss, if you get one bill for an entire building, that needs to be split up amongst various tenants. Then we've got a great process for having Property Boss calculate the billable amount for you. So let me go to the rent roll here. Give me an example. Let's say that Charity on Point, now we get a bill. So I can select the units of that building. And now if I use the Post Multiple Charges option, this is how I can use Property Boss to enter one amount and then have that amount split up based on square footage or based on a percentage that you've agreed to, and then have an amount calculated by Property Boss to be billed to the tenant. So you can see I've got different options here. I'm going to use the leases currently highlighted. You can have this create a one-time charge, or if you need to come up with a recurring amount, then you can create this for multiple tenants at once. So I'll select common area maintenance here. You can select now what dates this is going to cover. And now I can tell Property Boss, how do I want to have this divided? Do I want to have this based on square footage, or do I want to have, you can see on the lease, you can specify CAM percentage. So now it's going to present different transactions. I can go in and override these amounts. I can also post comments here, and that is going to display on invoices that Property Boss can generate. So if I need to add additional information, such as, here's a reading from the meter, for example, or anything else, then I can do so before these transactions post. When it comes to reconciliation of those CAM charges, you've got the transaction search option to where you can have Property Boss show you, okay, here's all the CAM billing for just one tenant. And then if I need to export that to Excel or print that out, I can do so. So we've got this transaction Merlin option where you can define reports that prompt you, okay, I'm going to now reconcile a certain tenant. So you can have it ask you then for, okay, give me the account you're reconciling, and then we'll only show the CAM charges for that account. Does that make sense?
So these are more the direct allocation of CAM itself, but I was thinking more of the annual at the end of the year when we were trying to do the CAM reconciliation to either charge back the tenants the additional amount or to refund them if the CAM total CAM actually came under.
Okay. So if you have post those transactions in Property Boss, then you can define these transaction search, what we call a Merlin report. You can define these reports to only show the actual billings. This also gives you subtotals. So you can have this report show for one particular account, okay, here's the actual billings, and then you can compare that to the annual assessment that was made.
To each tenant, right.
Right.
And then so the system would then just take all CAM charges for the year and divided by, I guess, is there a report that would show what basically per, let's say we use square footage and it's just strictly per square footage, then we just take total CAM charges for the year and divide it by per square foot and come up with, let's say, $1.50 was the actual CAM per square footage. Then is there a function report where it just shows all the tenants that we're charging CAM and what? So this report shows what we charged to actually bill them for the year, and then compare that to what the actual CAM comes up to per square footage and times it by the square footage of this particular tenant and come up with the difference and the amount to be refunded or to be charged, additional charge.
No, we do not have a predefined process to where you can just enter certain information and then have Property Boss tell you, okay, and your reconciliation process is complete, and the tenant now owes you the following, or you owe a tenant the following amount. Property Boss can track the data that you need to reconcile, but you'll need to take the data that Property Boss presents and then do some pretty minor calculations in order to see whether you owe money or whether the tenant owes you money.
So yeah, I guess it's just probably a matter of exporting the total bills to each tenant as one report, and then just figuring out what it's supposed to be per square footage and times it by the square footage per tenant, and then just plus or minus in 2 different columns in Excel.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like too much.
Yeah. So you can very easily define a report in Property Boss that shows, okay, for the year, here's all the CAM charges, and it's broken up by tenant. You export that to Excel, do some minor calculations, and then present that as your reconciliation process.
So all reports in here are available to be exported to Excel.
That's correct. Any of these navigators, like your rent roll, transaction search, any of the work order groups, your tenants, your vendors, you can define your own reports and then also export them to Excel.
So we are looking at a pretty tight time frame. So as far as implementation and sign up, I mean, how fast is the turnaround?
Well, we can get that going pretty quickly for you. If you wanted to sign up with Property Boss today, for example, we can email you everything you need in order to install Property Boss. Or if you want to go with our web-based option, then we can have an account set up for you in 2 business days. The biggest thing to consider in getting started with Property Boss is how to load data. We are able to import from Excel. We do have an implementation team to where if you provide Excel data to them, then they can, for a fee, convert that into Property Boss data and then make a database available to you. We always like to, whenever possible, when it comes to training, to deliver that training based on your data in Property Boss. So some clients will manually key in that information, gives them the ability to audit that data, and also spend time in the system and gives them a better idea of what they should have the training address. Or they'll import from Excel if they've got the ability to massage data, or if they've got the Excel format available for their data. Or some people take time.
Sorry? Has your team done MRI migration to Property Boss?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I've ever run across an MRI implementation to where we weren't able to get the information that we needed in an Excel format in order to load that data into Property Boss. We would not be able to bring in a transaction history, but we would be able to bring in your property, unit, leases and tenants, and starting balances.
So it is a full migration where we import all tenant abstract term info and all accounting history, however far we want to go back.
No, we would not be able to import your transaction history. We would bring over what we call static data, so your properties, your units, your leases, and tenants. And then we would, prior to your go-live date, load starting balances so that going forward, you would use Property Boss for any new information.
So the starting balances can be in Excel format and uploaded?
That's correct.
All right. So how can we go back to this demo and poke around the system ourselves?
We do have a fully functional trial copy that Kevin can get you set up with. It comes with sample data you can spend some time with. You can also create your own database and then load your information. And any information that you load into that trial copy, if you decide to move forward with Property Boss, we can activate that to where you wouldn't lose any work.
So that trial copy is downloaded from the web as well?
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and send us that info.
Okay.
We're looking at making a decision relatively quickly, so our CFO comes back next week, probably meet with him on Tuesday and get something going because, like I said, we are working with a pretty tight time frame. So,
Oh.
but I think the last hour has been extremely useful and informative, and I think right now we will check out a couple other systems, and the trial copy will definitely be of help, and we will definitely be in touch.
Okay, great. So we'll get the email to you immediately so that you can go ahead and set up that trial copy. And then let's work towards, we need to get from you if you want to go with a software purchase option or if you want us to host it for you, how many users, if there would be any modules. So once you all have spent a little bit more time with the trial copy, that might give you a better idea of how we would configure your account, and then we can come up with quotes for you.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.